I'm now happy to introduce our last speaker of the afternoon, Dr. Mohammed Abdul Mageed. Dr. Mageed is Canada Research Chair in Natural Language Processing and Machine Learning and Associate Professor in the School of Information and Department of Linguistics, a joint appointment, and Computer Science as an Associate Member at the University of British Columbia. His research in deep learning and natural language processing, focusing on deep representation learning and natural language sociopragmatics, with a goal to innovate more equitable, efficient, and social machines for improved human health, safer social networking, and reduced information overload. Applications of his work currently span a wide range of speech and language understanding and generation tasks. He's the director of the UBC Deep Learning and NLP Group, co-director of the SSHRC-funded InterPARES Trust AI, and co-lead of the SSHRC Ensuring Full Literacy Partnership Grant. He's a founding member of the Center for Artificial Intelligence Decision Making and Action, and a member of the Institute for Computing, Information, and Cognitive Systems.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. Right. So I titled my presentation towards culturally inclusive AI, and I'm going to speak about this topic in a general way, so hoping that it could inform some of our discussions in the I Trust AI partnership. I'm sure you have seen this. I've shown it before. It's AI generated. If machines can do this, they can do a lot of other interesting things. And so we definitely live through exciting times. And I'm starting to think, about what does this wave of progress in technology mean to us as humans? I definitely think that with this rate of progress and the scale of applications that we are seeing, AI is going to mean, a lot to humanity, and even like the very concept of what a human civilization means. So that said, as this recent wave of progress in AI is basically prompted by all the progress in large language models. Sometimes people refer to these as foundation models. And these are core technologies that have wide applications, as you know. And in their core, they are just next token prediction machines, right? So you have huge amounts of data on the web. You can take these data, and then you can train the model to predict what the next token should be, given the fact that you already know what the next token is in these huge amounts of data. Once this is done, you take these models and then you do what is known as an instruction tuning to make them responsive to human requests. As we've seen, for example, these models, you can ask them questions, you will answer these questions, whatever these questions are, given that you've trained them to do that. So they go through this process of instruction tuning. I think one of the fundamental questions is this concept of alignment. So we want them to be aligned to human needs. Alignment here can mean different things. One of the things it can mean is like we want them to precisely respond to our requests in the way we expect them to do. So we train them to do that, and that is usually referred to as alignment. I'm calling it the alignment problem because it is a problem. It is not always going to be a guarantee that these models will be quote unquote aligned the way we want them to be. More importantly, how do we align them to diverse populations is a very, very important question, because different types of communities would have different needs and different expectations and so on. And so how do we align in ways that respond to all the needs and the expectation, meet the expectations of these diverse communities? Some of the work that has been done so far shows already that these LLMs, the frontier LLMs that exist today, have huge cultural bias. So, for example, this study shows that responses from large language models are more similar to the opinions from certain populations, such as, in USA, Canada, Australia, and some European countries. So if we want these models to be universal, meaning if we want them to serve diverse communities, we would have to do some work to align them to the needs and the expectations and the cultures of these diverse communities, not to make them Anglo-centric, for example. Okay. So now this prompts us to think about this theme of culture and what is culture, right? So one definition is that culture is a shared set of values, beliefs, customs, behaviors, and artifacts that characterize a group of people, right? So this is something that people would share, whatever these beliefs and values and customs and artifacts mean. We want these models to align to these sets of cultural artifacts and customs and values and beliefs and ways of life and ways of thinking and so on of that particular group. Another component of what culture is the fact that it really encompasses not only ways people think, but also how they communicate. And this involves human language and language in general, and not like English or French or Spanish. I'm talking about human language, and you are aware that there are, according to some estimates, more than 7,000 languages in the world today, right? So there is also religion, social habits, arts, traditions, and whatnot. And all of this is involved when we say, culture, right? And I think a couple of days ago, we were talking about, the culture of if we talk about the culture of a department or the culture of a school, right? That's even another, more focused definition of what culture is. So culture is a really overloaded term. And if we want to make these LLMs culturally inclusive, we would have to operationalize, what we mean by culture and which communities we are targeting to make this alignment a reality, right? So here's a visual representation of what the Chinese culture, what comes to mind when you think about the Chinese culture. For example, I mean, you have something that talks about how knowledge is passed from one generation to another. Something about celebrations, arts and music, different types of architecture, spaces and places in the environment. And you have all of these artifacts and ideas and concepts and activities in mind when you think about the Chinese culture, right? And so given the wide scale of applications, and actually when you put these LLMs out in the open, the wide scale of requests and expectations that people have, you really have to align it to all of these different dimensions within a given culture. Okay, and I mentioned already something about human language and the fact that the world today is very diverse with a lot of languages and so on. And if we really want to be inclusive, we have to be linguistically inclusive as well, right? And because, simply stated, if we build technologies for certain communities but not others, what this practically means in real life is that we are depriving these communities economically, let alone other types of dimensions of what deprivation would mean, right? Because now you have communities that do not have access to the technology in their language, so they cannot do education well, they cannot do health, and so on and so forth, right? So it really has direct negative implications right away, when we build technologies in biased, non-diverse ways. So that's a desirable thing, to be also linguistically inclusive. And now, how do we just make these models linguistically inclusive, and how do we make them understand language, right? And then you might think that, okay, so we just like want these to take a question and respond to the question. But then, I mean, it's really complicated the way language functions. We had some discussions about what context means, right? And so when we talk about language, it's not only the semantics at a particular level of, this word means this and that sentence means this and that. It's really much more complex than this. So, for example, I'm just going to say, there is this idea of linguistic diversity, but there is also a lot of nuances in terms of the distribution of language over geography. Even within the same, what we think is a single language, there is also dialectal variation, for example, of, a particular, language, right? And some of the things that people do not think of as dialects of the same language, these are actually different languages, so I can tell you comfortably that some of what people think are dialects of a language such as Arabic, they are really different languages. And simply because if you take a definition of language as something that is mutually intelligible, so if two people are speaking what they think are different dialects and they can't understand one another, then these are two different languages because simply they are not mutually intelligible. So that dimension of linguistic diversity and thinking about how language varies over geography, and the fact that we want to actually serve these models or these technologies in ways that actually able to function across all these different populations is really important. All right, and some of our recent research, we have shown the acute limitations of the frontier LLMs when it comes to their linguistic coverage. So one of our papers just showed that ChatGPT models, for example, are hardly even able to identify. You give it a piece of text and you tell it, what is this language? You give it a sequence of words from a particular language and say, what is this language? It's not really able to even identify, with high accuracy beyond, I think we found 30 languages. Talking about the world today having around 7,000 or even more languages and language varieties and dialects, that's really a tiny minority. And even the updates that has happened to some of these models more recently, we talk about now we can cover 50 languages. Okay, if it goes so far, then you start talking about 100 languages. And then if you really look very carefully at these 100 languages, you will find actually many of the languages are really covered poorly within the models. And even the data sets that they think belong to a particular languages, they do not. Look upon human scrutiny of what the data sets where the pre-training happens and so on. So it's a very complex problem in many ways. And so language also, when we talk about how it operates within society, there is this idea of people interacting with language and this sociolinguistic variation that exists, right? So depending on the demographics, the age of a user or a speaker or a writer, their gender, their social class, their level of education. So all of these are very important variables when we think about what context is and what meaning is, because meaning really varies depending on so many variables, right? So the same statement could mean different things depending on, you turn that knob of many of these variables, right? So that makes it really complex and complicated for these LLMs to understand and generate language at these levels. Okay, that's one dimension. And now, also, these different people interacting in different situations. Now you vary another variable, which is the situation. The same two people saying the same thing in two different situations, then you'd have different meanings, right? So, and this is, I took this photo recently when I was in Greek, and if you say it's all Greek to me, somewhere, it means something. But if you are in Greece and you find it, it's just it's a literal meaning, in a sense, right? And so, who is saying what to whom, when, where, how, and what? That is like the pragmatics of social communication, right? And so, just to appreciate how complex, the meaning it can be, and how complex and how diverse and rich what we could be expecting from these models, to understand and generate. Okay. And then there are also other important factors such as the quality of the data. I mean, computer sciences, scientists usually talk about, garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't give me high quality data, the output of the models is not going to be high quality, right? So it's very important to ensure high quality data, whatever this means. I mean, it depends on, what type of data you are feeding into the model. High quality text would mean text that is fluent, that is expressive of what you want it to express, that doesn't have a lot of noise and junk. If you just like harvest text from the internet, you could find like JavaScript code and whatever within the text, for example, and also things related to profanity and hate speech and negative language and so on. If this is there in the data, then the model is going to be racist in a sense, or like hateful and whatnot. So that's just another important factor. And yet another factor is the scarcity of the data, because I talked about meaning being complex and the desire or the need to be diverse and cover populations and languages. But then there is this idea of low resource languages, meaning low resource, that we don't have access to huge amounts of data, sometimes even like little amounts of data from many of the languages. I do a lot of work on dialects of Arabic and African languages, for example, and I know the majority of African languages, I mean, most people don't even know the names of these languages, let alone having access to data from these languages, right? And so it's really challenging to develop technology from many of these languages because of many reasons. One of these reasons is scarcity of the data, right? Okay. Then yet another challenge is the idea that once we develop something, we want to evaluate it, right? In order to ensure the model performs what we expect it to perform, right? How do we evaluate? There are these benchmarks, evaluation benchmarks, and the available benchmarks that people have built, they have lots of issues. Many of the benchmarks have lots of issues. Somebody builds a benchmark and they claim it to be okay. This is, going to cover all these different aspects of communication or like measure something. Upon use, it turns out that it doesn't. And then now we need another benchmark and then yet another benchmark and so on. And within professions, when we talk about the archives profession, for example, if you wanted to do a certain task, do we have benchmarks for these tasks? So for example, a very, very concrete example, if you want to build a GPT model for the field of archives or for archival knowledge, for example, we need to evaluate the model, in ways that are standardized, that allows other people to compare to our model, right? And so we have to build the benchmark. So for example, just to illustrate, if you want this model to answer questions intelligibly, then you'd have to have a set of questions and their answers and a way to measure the extent to which the model is actually able to answer these questions. And this question answering part will be just a component within the benchmark you're using for evaluation. And to complicate it, if you want this to function within many languages, then you will have to have it in different languages, for example. And if you want to build this benchmark for students, for example, then there are different levels, undergraduate versus bachelor's versus master's or PhD and so on. So it's really kind of a challenging thing to do, just to appreciate how challenging it is. Then there is also the idea of ethics, right? So there are certain things that we expect humans to maintain, and then we should also be expecting models to maintain, right? And to be ethical, not to cheat, not to deceive, and things like this, right? And it means something, so when we are developing these models, how do we ensure these ethical considerations are respected and maintained, right? So people would usually do things like, putting guard rails, and that red teaming these models, for example. You just like try to kind of like stress test them and put them under lots of situations where you see their edge cases and like how would they respond and whatnot, right? And even like things like jailbreaking the models, like just like trying to get them to do things that they were not designed to do at all. And so this is a very important component of developing these models. It actually takes a lot of time. So big teams that develop these LLMs have actually groups that specialize in putting these guardrails in place and so on. And groups that are diverse, because it takes a lot of training to actually be able to just think about these edge cases and these situations where these models can fail. And I can tell you, and at some point maybe I will show you, we have done very recent work where we find that even the most frontier, the best LLMs in the market today, we can get them to say things that are extremely racist. And if all this money has been spent in order to put these guardrails in place for these LLMs, and they still can do this, I mean, that's really kind of, it's not good. Okay. I have many more slides, so I kind of like go a little bit faster. Yeah. Oh, okay. So we have a bunch of models that cover some domains. So education. So the interest is in archives and culture, but there is also interest in building models for education, finance, healthcare, and so on, right? And so I'll just say that how do we build across these domains, but also maintain this cultural inclusivity, right? So I'm kind of like merging these themes together, as you could see. I showed you something about the Chinese culture, so maybe you already, and I defined what culture would mean. And now, like Africa, which is a huge continent with so diverse populations, so around 2,000 languages, language varieties and dialects in Africa. As I said, it's technologically behind, and there are lots of interest in developing technologies for Africa. And I shared with you that we just acquired a nice grant to actually push our work within Africa and within African NLP. So I'm very interested in developing for Africa. Africa is a fascinating place. If you haven't traveled, so at some point, hopefully you will. And the people of Africa have a lot of wisdom. They also have so very rich culture, traditions, their ways of life, their ways of thinking, and so on. And how do we capture all this? If you want to do like image captioning, or you want to do image detection, like of objects within images, or like just take any of the shelf model and apply it to a local community in Africa. Think about how problematic this would be, right? And so there is this desire to build for people, but actually not only build for, or to build with people. So the technology needs to be built with the hands of the people who will use it, because these people are the people who actually know what their needs are and what their final use cases would look like, and so on. And even like developing this technology, it's not going to be working top down, because a lot of extractive I would say practices would happen, because okay, I just want to build this app or this technology because you use it to for capitalistic reasons, and then all of that is really kind of critical, and we need to kind of like be thinking about it. We've been building for Africa and with Africa. I would say definitely with Africa, because this work, I'm African in the first place, but I also have colleagues and students and so on. I collaborate with from the African continent, and we've built like tools that do African language understanding, African language generation, African language identification, and so on. And these tools are, more or less state of the art in whatever they do, which is something we're very happy about. We've developed African language identification tools that handle more than 100 African languages. And these tools are being used so very widely now. I'm in discussion with many people in many organizations, and I'm very pleased to see, how important. And like actually, the more I talk about, the more I get engaged in some of these, I find fascinating use cases. Like somebody just like emailed me a week ago about a group that actually wants to take some tool that gets used in the health domain, and it exists only it's a software, it exists only in English, and they want to localize it. And they want to do this, they will take the software, they will translate it by humans, but they think that if they use our token models that do machine translation, this will accelerate the process of localization. And then we're going to probably end up talking to them and trying to help them and so on. There's also a lot of work that we do for the Arab world, and the Arab world is also, it cuts across 2 different continents. The population of the Arab world is around 450 million people. They speak, in very, very diverse ways. And it's not an extremely monolithic culture. It depends, like, it's an extended geographical region as well. If you are in Mauritania, it's differently from being, in some other country, the Gulf region, for example, right? And so the dialects vary, the language vary, but also the habits, the customs, the expectations, the socioeconomic situation, and so on. And the use cases of LLMs will be different. And we've actually been building for the Arab world. So recently, actually this year, we had this vision language model called Peacock that actually can handle very rich situations for the Arab world. And we have recently started getting it to actually function for Arabic dialects as well. So if you go to ChatGPT and ask it in Egyptian Arabic to caption an image, it will caption it in standard Arabic, even though you are asking in a dialect. Our model doesn't do this. I ask it in a particular dialect, it will respond in that dialect, which we think is much more appropriate and kind of like user engaging and so on. Now, cultural heritage, and things that relate to the archive, things that relate to our ability to compute over, our history and, all the rich civilization and so on. So we've been working on this as well, as you already know, doing things like, OCR and handwriting recognition and whatnot. Some of the models we have built include, these OCR models on the top left-hand side that do quite well in Arabic. Very recently, actually, this year, this is a paper that will get presented next month at EMNLP. It's a multi-dialectal Arabic speech recognition. We built a data set, and something I'm very happy about is this community approach. We, as a community of, I think, in this paper, I don't know, we're probably 20-something authors on the paper. A year-long, project where we meet every week, we work together, we create data sets for the local dialects of, I think, 8 to 10 countries. People from all these countries, we work together and so on. And finally, we're able to release a data set and also kind of build models that can handle dialects, because off-the-shelf technology doesn't handle all these local dialects. So this is called Casablanca. I was in Morocco, so I just called it Casablanca. And as you can see, the goal is to allow, and I'm moving also, within ITrust AI into that space of multimodal models, right? So we want to be able to, the AlphaSense I showed you, for example, and all of these models we work with, I want us to be able to talk to the model. I don't have to write. And then the model will actually respond to me, maybe in writing. If we have 5 more years, maybe we can do text-to-speech so the model can respond also in speech. I think actually we can do, if it is English, we can get the model to respond in speech. It's not very hard. But, if we want to do other languages, maybe something that would take more time. So I built quite, multimodal, multidialectal LLMs and so on. Now, machine translation is also something that I'm very excited about because of, I gave you an example of this group that wants to take a software in the health domain and, how, our machine translation technology that we built for Africa, this model called TOCAN, can actually help them. And, it's a model that is 10 blue points, it's kind of like significantly better than, what anything that is in the market, even like including by big tech and so on. And then we will continue to do that for African. We are also doing it for lots of Arabic dialects. I'm very happy that we have a huge project in the making. We have already made a lot of progress in it that is going to allow us to cover about 10 Arabic dialects. And it's going to be something that is kind of a significant stride compared to the technology that exists in the market today. Of course, whatever we do, we ensure that we cover also the top 10 languages in the world. So, of course, we include English, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, French, and so on. So our token model, for example, we ensured that it has all of these languages so that we are able to translate from these languages into African languages and from African languages to any of these languages. In fact, what we did a many-to-many approach, which is like, we have 150 pairs. Go from any one of them to any other one. And we will continue to also do this for our work on Arabic dialects and so on. So the idea, and like, I have this idea in mind that I want to actually connect, because even within the research community, if you're doing machine translation and you are in Europe, you're working on German and English and French and so on. If you are in the Arab world, you're just like doing for Arabic. If you are in Africa, you're just doing for Africa. And I think we should slice these bubbles a little bit and kind of like put all these connections even within the research community. So this is something I'm not only doing in our own research, I'm also talking about it. Like when I go somewhere and say, we should do this and we should do that. I think, spreading this culture within the scientific community is also very important. With that, I come to the conclusions. I would like to thank, everybody in my own research group. Peter is here, one of the people. And I would like to thank all of you because you are also part of the bigger research group where I function, and all the funders, including Shirk.
Questions for Mohammed? Yes, Ken, and then Hugo.
So one of the early things you said was that what something means depends on who said it to whom, in what context.
Situation.
But I don't see how LLMs, as they're currently implemented, can address that, because they basically seem to be stateless unless you were to include the date of a document or the date of a data collection as a tag or a dimension in the data.
Are we still recording? We're still recording, okay. Okay, so thank you for the question. I think the question is about, the LLMs being stateless, which means, they would not necessarily be able to handle situations where meaning will vary according to the situational variables, right? I was asking if we're still recording or not because I wanted to answer in a particular way. I still be able to answer. I don't think it's a secret. I was just, at Meta a week ago, and they are working on this Ray-Ban Meta glasses, right? So it has a camera, and then you can talk to it and so on. You ask it to take. I'm not like advertising for Meta, but I mean the idea is we shouldn't be thinking about LLMs as stateless anymore, or things that you can only use in your phone or on your computer. They will be with us, and it's not going to only be like text or speech or image. There's also kind of the ability to see, right? And so that gives them a lot of and there is a lot of work that integrates all these modalities now. So I imagine now people taking all these, if you're Netflix or like, some other similar producer, and I am aware that, many of the big tech now are kind of like collaborating with many of the media production companies, you can take all the movies, and now you can allow these LLMs to actually see and exposure to what happens in particular situations and so on. So I'm not saying this will solve the problem, but I think the capabilities of LLMs will kind of significantly improve over time, and they will have this kind of situational understanding, in ways that are compared really significantly to what we have today.
So I see that's an enrichment in terms of, and your word was modalities, which I think is probably a good one, but I'm thinking of things like, can I ask an LLM, what difference did it mean for someone 10 years ago to use this phrase versus someone today using exactly the same phrase?
Right. Well, so I'll ask you, if I have already fed the LLM movies, 1 million movies, some of these are 50 years ago versus some of them are recent. So, I mean, my point here is the amount of data you can ingest within these models are huge. Like, if we can scale compute, compute is really a bottleneck, right? And if we can improve the methods that we use in order to train these LLMs, because it takes a lot of time to train them. Even if you have huge compute, right? But we have huge amounts of data, and if you have a lot of money and you can license all this data and kind of ingest it in the model.
But as you're saying use, I'm not hearing discrimination between, in 1950, if someone wrote this, it meant something very different than what it means in 2024.
I'm very confident if I go now to any of these models and I say, what did this phrase meant, in 1940 versus today, it will be able to answer.
So they're capturing chronological data.
Yes.
Okay.
Hugo.
But I want to piggyback on that because that's really my question. But no matter amount of data you feed it, it will always have a paradigm and a culture.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot escape that. So it will tell you, given what I know, here is what the sentence meant 50 years ago, but it cannot transport itself into the body of an LLM from 50 years ago. And that's
unless you tell it to do so.
No, but that's the thing, is that's the problem with
I think I can do you a live demo now. I can ask ChatGPT the voice model.
Yeah,
I can say you are an expert. You lived like 50 years ago. Speak with me in this language.
But it will do it with the paradigm and the knowledge it has now.
Yes.
Right?
Maybe. I don't know.
No. Yes. There is no other LLM than the one we have now. And that LLM is trained with a certain data set. That's the problem with the idea of cultural inclusivity for AI is really nice. But first, it's a very biased way of seeing of it's our way today of describing what inclusivity is. And the problem is that culture is so embedded into people that, what if our way of doing cultural inclusivity really doesn't talk to another culture? And they're going to say, well, your cultural inclusivity is nice, but it's a very Western cultural inclusivity. And I recognize what I learned in Western universities.
I totally agree with you. This is why I said, developing with Africa, not for Africa, for example.
Yeah. I think you really got something when you said that, because I think the only way is to have culturally biased LLMs.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying,
because you need LLMs. No, you need LLMs who are culturally completely impregnated.
They need to post their positionality is actually what it is.
Praskovia?
It's interesting.
So thank you, Mohammed, for your presentation. You talked about good things like when you are in these different spaces where this creation is taking place, how you encourage collaboration. And now I'm just wondering how often you guys, with these ingenious minds, take your point of departure from the SDGs and then thinking about issues related to the data divide, technological divide, sustainable development?
I mean, all the time. The answer to your question, all the time. I mean, why would I spend a year working on a single research paper? I mean, I can be faster than this. I don't have to have, 50 meetings in order to just write a paper. Every week sitting with we have another paper that is, not out yet. We have 47 authors in that paper, and it's a paper about culture. And again, goes to the same. So we think a lot really deeply about all issues related to data, scale of data, availability of data, and then issues related to, can people use this model? If they don't have enough compute infrastructure, would they be able to use this model? And so there is a lot of work that is going on around making these models smaller, more compute intensive, costly, and so on. I have one of my PhD students who just graduated, just went to Google DeepMind, and he has been working on efficiency of LLMs. And big tech, including Google, they are interested in this, and I think this is one of the reasons they hired him. And we are also interested in this. I mean, we have a couple papers. One already accepted this year, another one under review, and both of these are on the efficiency. Can we take a big model, a few billion parameter model, and then distill the knowledge of this model into let's say 500,000 parameter model, and then still do well, right? So we have some work on speech models that do this. So I think and actually it's good to start from that position of why do you do this research? What does it mean, and for whom, and what type of problem, real world problem, is it going to solve?
Because one of the things, sorry, I'm
Yes.
just following up.
No.
One of the things that worries me is that we've had the open data movements. They've been around for so long, but we still see that open data is concentrated in the hands of very few people.
Yeah.
We know that all these developments are feeding on enormous amounts of data, but we also know countries that hardly have any infrastructure, information management infrastructure in place.
Yeah.
And so
I'm with you. I mean,
I think about economic determinism that is sort of driving all these developments, and it's so easy to say we are, we're embracing the SDGs and we are talking about sustainable development, but we know that the market plays a very big role in steering which direction.
The challenges are there, and they will probably remain there for a very long time. I'm totally with you. I'm also with Ken in the idea of these models. Can we make them at that level of understanding of all these complications of and situational variables and so on. I think these challenges are there. They will continue to be there to maybe a significant extent, especially given that in real world when we move and when we interact, the nuances in communication are huge. Add to this the linguistic diversity and all of that. But I think there are ways to mitigate some of these problems. I don't have answers to yeah.
Tracy?
Sorry, Tracy.
Yeah.
So nobody's dealt with deep and shallow learning and reading, right? The digital humanities hasn't dealt, the question that you're asking, people haven't even dealt with those things, let alone machines dealing with those things. But I think what Mohammed is saying is getting us closer than what most can, with the odd digital humanities person who can sit and do that very, very deep reading of that one thing in a context. So it's a great question, but it's kind of an unfair question because humans can't really do that stuff. So that's one thing. From a digital divide thing, there's the Oxford Internet Institute has been doing this fantastic read. They did it and they stopped, but they could come back to it. So I'm going to see if I can roster up some relationships for you with these folks. Because they were doing internet geographies to map out precisely what Proskovia was talking about. For example, the map that you showed at the very beginning, you could look at the map of Wikipedia. Who produces content in Wikipedia? You would get the same map, even though Wikipedia is supposed to be the great equalizer. Because of the infrastructure divide, the language divide, all these other kinds of things. At the same time, Inuktitut just got into Google Translate. And that was ITK, an Inuit community, like we're talking a small community up north with no infrastructure, barely an internet. You know, you can only update your software at night when the lines are quiet kind of place. And yet, they've been able to work with Google to get Inuit to do Google Translate. And it's amazing, like, and they're amazed, and they're talking about, and they're having all these nuanced questions, right, that we're having right now, because Indigenous knowledge is very specific, it's hyper-localized, but they're willing to participate and join into that transformation, which brings me to my next question. Is anybody familiar, you would be familiar with GEOS, the Global Earth Observation Systems of Systems. Their Global Earth Observation Systems of Systems is private and public and nonprofit. I think it's 195 organizations are involved who purposely donate satellite and radar capabilities, compute time and whatever for humanitarian reasons. So one part is, we sell our stuff to each other, that's fine, but when it comes to a crisis or calamity, they have an open data process to be able to share under humanitarian cause, and it's amazing. It's a multi-billion-dollar amazing thing. So what's the multi-billion-dollar amazing thing that can do that bridging? Like what's this new, and that's beyond the conversation of archives, but what's this new infrastructure, this new global language model systems of systems that will enable this more global humanitarian construct to allow smaller communities to be able to play in the game? Because it's hard to play in the game. We can't even play in the game.
Well, I think this can go a long way.
For sure.
You know, because you can put apps on it, and if you have internet connection, you solve a huge issue.
For sure. But I'm talking about something different, Mohammed. I'm talking like a coalition of people dedicated to that activity.
President, can I just speak to your point? Good governance.
Yes.
Because we have dinosaurs to pit president for presidency. You know,
but this stuff happens beyond that.
Facebook is shut down in my country. Facebook is not allowed. Can you imagine that?
We need to wrap this up. I think we could continue with this discussion for a very long time.
We'll continue over dinner.
We can continue it over dinner.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you. And thank you to our hosts at Regis for this wonderful symposium. And we'll say goodbye.